Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Higher Education, Forgotten Pasts and Alternative Futures, a new series of panel discussions sponsored by Scholars for a New Deal for Higher Education, Critical Legal Collective, and the American Association of University Professors Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom.
Unmute means that we would be heard.
I'm Shannon Clark, Associate Professor of History at Montclair State University and a member of Scholars for a New Deal for Higher Education. This series is intended to serve as a catalyst for the development of new democratic models of higher education as a public good. Now more than ever, as we fight to defend students, faculty, and campus workers from the Trump administration's unprecedented attacks, we need to imagine a different future for colleges and universities. We need to build towards a future of democratic institutional governance, tuition-free enrollment, fair and just labor conditions, academic autonomy, and protection of criticism and dissent. As we begin this process of rethinking what higher education can and should be, and of creating new institutional structures, we can be guided by various examples of alternative practices from both past and present. This first installment in our series, Lessons from the CUNY Experience, examines both the history of the City University of New York as an example of higher education that was once tuition-free with open enrollment, and CUNY today as a site of struggle where the future of higher education is being contested. Shamtoli Hook, Associate Professor of Law at the CUNY School of Law and a member of Critical Legal Collective, has very kindly and generously agreed to moderate our discussion. Please stay tuned over the coming weeks for announcements about upcoming webinars in this series. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little information on the sponsoring organizations for this series. Scholars for a New Deal for Higher Education is a group of teachers and researchers committed to rebuilding our colleges and universities so that they can be a true public good for everyone. We believe that generous government investment in our system of public higher education, along with fair labor conditions and free undergraduate tuition, are a vital foundation for a democratic, equitable, and just society. We were prime advocates for the 2021 College for All legislation, sponsored by Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Pramila Jayapal. We also serve a coordinating function amongst various organizations that are active in bringing about progressive change within higher education. Critical Legal Collective is a group of scholars and activists who have come together in the wake of continuing attacks on critical knowledge and multiracial democracy. Its goal is to ensure that students, teachers, scholars, advocates, activists, and community groups have access to sources of critical knowledge and support in applying this knowledge within the university and surrounding communities. The collective advances this mission through its research and advocacy in support of academic freedom and campus speech, and its research and campaign development in support of democratic university governance. The collective also creates pedagogical legal materials with a specific focus on anti-racism, and it advocates for critical perspectives in the teaching of constitutional law. The Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom is a Mellon-funded project at the American Association of University Professors. It is committed to preserving and expanding conditions that make it possible to work, teach, learn, create, and to share knowledge in ways that promote the common good. The center serves as a vital resource and knowledge hub for all people, including faculty, students, campus workers, alumni, administrators, trustees, parents, journalists, policymakers, and business leaders who are seeking to build a flourishing higher education system rooted in institutional autonomy, workplace democracy, and freedom from coercion and external interference. And with that, it is my tremendous pleasure to hand it over to Professor Hook.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon, for the introduction of the topic for tonight, really looking at the university as a crucial site for broader issues of democracy. As was mentioned, I'm a professor of law at CUNY School of Law. I'm also a member of this Critical Legal Collectives Governance Project, which formed together primarily to examine closely the university and what are some systems that need to be put in place. We have a wonderful group of panelists. I will introduce the panelists. Each of them will be speaking for 10 minutes, and then we hope to open up for questions. If you've joined us so that we know who's in the room with us, please introduce yourself, your affiliation, and then as you're listening, think about the questions. We'll invite you to put the questions into the chat. Just as before I introduce the speakers, CUNY, you might wonder why CUNY has been sort of selected. I think there's been a tremendous amount of innovation that has occurred historically and in the present with respect to CUNY. My own law school as being an alternative law school, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And so the guests and the panels that there's much to be learned from the CUNY experience. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our panelists. First, we will have Dr. Ellen Schrecker. In addition to being a member of AAUP's Committee on Academic Freedom and Tenure, Dr. Schrecker is an American historian and author who has written extensively about McCarthyism and American higher education. Her latest book, The Lost Promise: American Universities in the 60s, to be published by the University of Chicago Press in December 2021, provides the first comprehensive analysis of American higher education during this turbulent decade. Her previous books, No Ivory Tower, McCarthyism and Universities, The Age of McCarthyism, A Brief History of Documents. Other books, many are The Crimes of McCarthyism in America, The Lost Soul of Higher Education, Corporatization, and the Assault on Academic Freedom and the End of the University. As you can tell, she's written extensively precisely on responding to the moment that we have been likened to McCarthy period. She's written 4 publications in Nation, The Chronicle of Higher Education, and edited Academia, the American Association of University Professors magazine. And, during her time, she's also written a Chinese cookbook. So it's not all work, and some also other areas. Karina Mullen is our second panelist. Karina Mullen teaches at CUNY in the Department of Economics and Political Science at the Brooklyn College and John Jay College. She has been an active member and leader of the CUNY for Palestine, Labor for Palestine, the Sanctuary and Popular University Network, and the Anti-Imperialist Scholars Collective, and is a PSC CUNY delegate. Karina is an associate editor for the Middle East Critique and sits on the editorial board of Science and Society. Our third speaker is Musa Karim. Musa is an undergrad student at the City University of New York. With a strong commitment to activism, he actively organizes initiatives for the Students for Justice in Palestine Club at BMCC and beyond. As a proud Palestinian, Musa is passionate about advocating for human rights and raising awareness about the genocide to his people that they continue to face. Through his involvement in student activism, he aims to contribute to the liberation of his people and expand humanitarian efforts. So as you can see, we have a phenomenal group of panelists, and so I won't waste much time, and I will hand it over to Ellen to start us off, to provide the kind of historical context to this particular moment that we're in on the attack of universities.
Right. Well, because I've written so much about academic freedom and McCarthyism, I'm often asked, how does what's happening today compare to that? And I usually say, well, it depends on the context. No more. What's happening today is worse, much worse than anything that happened in the 50s. McCarthyism only focused on the past political activities of individual professors, at least 100 of whom were fired and blacklisted only because they refused to cooperate with the anti-communist witch hunt. Today's attack on higher education is much broader than McCarthyism. It touches everything that colleges and universities do. You know, there's a huge list: curricula, syllabi, library books, athletics, accreditation, medical research, DEI programs, whole departments, and even, as at the New College, Florida, entire institutions. And it does so at a moment when the academic community is much weaker than it was during McCarthyism. McCarthyism took place during what historians call the golden age of higher education. Universities had considerable prestige and popularity. They were expanding enormously as state legislatures and the federal government were literally throwing money at them. That situation changed dramatically during the 1960s. First, as a result of the powerful social movements that swept through the nation's campuses. And then, when a ferocious right-wing backlash combined with the imposition of a neoliberal economic regime of austerity in the 1970s, the campaign against the university undermined the academy's political support. So how did that change occur? How did a once highly respected institution become the reviled enemy of the nation's most powerful politicians? Well, until the Second World War, American higher education essentially catered primarily to professionals and the upper-class young men of leisure. But after the mid-40s, it was transformed into a system that not only produced the main scientific advances of the 20th century, but also provided a college education and the social mobility associated with it to millions of previously excluded young men and women. As higher education became increasingly central to American society, it grew exponentially, especially within the public sector that offered low, and even in places like New York and California, free tuitions. It also grew enormously. New institutions were founded while older ones expanded and upgraded their missions. Teachers' colleges became four-year liberal arts colleges, and then became regional universities, and then became Research One universities. But there was a dark side to the golden age, not just McCarthyism, which cast a chill over the nation's campuses, but also professors were pruning their syllabi. They stopped teaching about controversial subjects, and students abstained from political activity. But there was also the fact that American higher education was essentially segregated, legally in the South, but de facto in the North. And much of the movement that changed that situation developed on American campuses. In cities in the Upper South, like Nashville and Atlanta, students from historically Black colleges and universities launched sit-ins in 1960 that brought the civil rights movement to the center of American politics. In the North, there were only tiny numbers of African American and other people of color in most traditionally white schools. In 1963, for example, there were 5 Blacks at Princeton, 8 at Cornell, and CCNY in the middle of the largest Black and Puerto Rican community in the United States. Students of color there accounted for less than 10% of the student body. By the late 1960s, Black students at Northern schools did begin to increase, not very quickly. But those students began, and their allies, began to press for admitting more students of color and providing programs in Black studies with Black professors to teach them. Their protests were to bring open admissions to CUNY and elsewhere, as well as to expand the curriculum to create programs focusing on women, Hispanics, LGBTQ people, and other previously underrepresented groups. At the same time, the broader student movement began at Berkeley in the fall of 1963, where student protesters, many of whom had already participated in the civil rights movement, formed the free speech movement to gain more political freedom on campus. A few months later, the war in Vietnam escalated, and faculty members essentially jump-started the anti-war movement by organizing teach-ins to give information about the war to their colleagues, their students, and the general public, because nobody in the United States, except for literally probably less than 10 people, knew anything about Vietnam and why the United States was doing something very bad there. As the anti-war movement intensified on campus, students also began to oppose their university's support for the draft and their cooperation with the military-industrial complex. Administrators responded to these protests with confusion. The situation was completely unprecedented, really. Although most demonstrations were orderly, a few became unruly, especially when administrators took a hard line, refused to deal fairly with their students, and called the cops. That attracted enormous media attention and turned much of the public against the students and their schools. At that point, a conservative backlash began, taken up by opportunistic and ambitious right-wing politicians, the most well-known of which was Ronald Reagan, who based his successful gubernatorial campaign in California on his opposition to the free speech movement, promising to put down protests, quote, at the point of a bayonet, if necessary. State legislators elsewhere followed, proposing all kinds of punitive measures against student activists, and most deleteriously, abandoning their previously unstinting financial support for their public colleges and universities. That's a process that continues to this day. And to make matters worse, a worldwide economic crisis in the mid-1970s moved American politics to the right. Political elites adopted a neoliberal economic regime that sought to shrink the public sector, universities included. In response to that new austerity, the Academy's leaders focused on their bottom lines and restructured their institutions by centralizing power in the administration and taking it away from the faculty. They also raised tuitions and relied much more heavily on wealthy donors and the federal government. And of course, they cut costs, most notably by reducing the faculty from one consisting of tenured and tenure-track professors to one where about 75% of all instruction was handled by poorly paid part-time and temporary employees who have no economic security and lacked the academic freedom to push back against the increasingly serious right-wing attack on higher ed. That attack has been led by a network of ultra-conservative activists and billionaires like the Koch brothers, who have sought to undermine higher education because they believe that it was going to turn future leaders against the business community. So for more than 50 years, that network has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into right-wing think tanks, publications, academic programs, and conservative organizations that have convinced much of the American public that universities are dominated by elitist radicals who oppress straight white Christian males. Trump adopted that agenda during his 2020 presidential campaign. And though he lost the election, his attacks on the teaching of history by supposedly woke educators got picked up by his supporters at the state level. And now that he's back in the White House, he's threatening the very existence of higher education as we know it. What is amazing, however, is that unlike the acquiescence and silence that occurred on most campuses during McCarthyism, there is now resistance. It is having an impact, even at Harvard. It shows that if we stand together, we will banish fear from our campuses, so that once again, we can teach, learn, and create the more equitable system of higher education that our albeit flawed democratic system of government so desperately needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen, so much for providing that historical context. It's really essential to look at the ways in which we can see certain cycles and patterns and almost an optimism of the movement of resistance. So just wanted to highlight the theme that you raised before I invite Karina to talk specifically with the CUNY example, is this expansion of free tuition in CUNY, open enrollment, that was really kind of the result of a vibrant radical civil rights movement. And then we see this like backlash and retrenchment and retaliation. And so we see this sort of shrinkage happening and a greater challenge on higher ed as a public good as we see more people of color, women entering into higher education. So we have to see this conservative backlash as an attack around broader principles of democracy. So just thank you so much for that historical context. So Karina, we want to invite you to talk specifically about the CUNY example and your organizing that Ellen is talking about, this resistance that had not occurred as much maybe to this vibrancy in response to McCarthyism, which to me is very optimistic, which is why you always need historians to make you feel optimistic about the present.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for that, Shamsali. And thank you, Ellen, for really enlightening and inspiring words. I am going to, and I'd like to thank the organizers of this panel. And thank you so much for inviting me, and to my fellow panelists and to everyone attending as well. I'm going to spend my time in the talk speaking about CUNY's century-long history as a battleground between radical organizing and state repression, state and administrative repression, I should say. I'm going to look at the Gaza Solidarity Encampment in 2024 as a somewhat of a turning point in campus struggles, and explore how the contemporary sanctuary work at the university builds on this legacy to confront escalating fascist repression. And I want to say that my remarks come out of a collective article written by organizers with CUNY for Palestine that I'm also organized with and a member of. So the City University of New York has always been more than an educational institution. It's also a battleground where the contradictions produced by settler colonialism, imperialism, and racial capitalism play out in real time. Its radical tradition stretches back to the early 20th century when City College became known as the poor man's Harvard, educating generations of Jewish immigrants who brought with them communist and anti-fascist politics from Eastern Europe. But this radicalism that was fostered on the campus in the early 20th century came at a cost. In 1940, the Rap Couder Committee launched a witch hunt against suspected communists at CUNY. I'm sure, Ellen, that you've researched this period and know much more than I do about it, forcing dozens of faculty to testify about their political affiliations. Over 50 educators were fired at that time or resigned under pressure, and this was really a precursor to McCarthyism that established CUNY's long tradition of what, I think is administrative collaboration with state repression. And of course, CUNY is not unique in this. This is across the board, our universities. The university's next major flashpoint came in 1969 when the Black and Puerto Rican student community seized control of City College, demanding open admissions and ethnic studies programs that reflected their histories. For weeks, students occupied campus buildings. The administration's response revealed the racialized, class, and political fault lines that still define CUNY today. While the students won their demands, they were simultaneously smeared and criticized. Among other things, and this is interesting for the current moment, they were accused of anti-Semitism for drawing connections between their own oppression and the Palestinian liberation struggle. And this, of course, is a tactic that would resurface decades later. This history matters because it shows how CUNY's identity has always been contested. On the one hand, it's a public university. It is a public university serving New York's working class. It's the largest urban university in the country. Today, 80% of its 250,000 students are people of color, and nearly half come from families earning less than $30,000 a year. On the other hand, its leadership has consistently aligned with power, whether through our board of trustees comprised of Wall Street investors, corporate lawyers, real estate moguls, to the university's investments in weapons manufacturers that profit from Israeli settler colonialism, or through direct collaboration with repressive state forces. The 2010s saw this contradiction sharpen when CUNY's Graduate Center student government passed a BDS resolution in 2016. The backlash was immediate. Zionist organizations pressured then Governor Cuomo to cut CUNY's funding, while administrators launched investigations into Palestinian students like Nordine Kiswani. Yet the movement only grew stronger. By 2021, as Israel bombed Gaza and attempted to ethnically cleanse Sheikh Jarrah, CUNY students and faculty won historic victories. From the PSC CUNY's resolution in solidarity with the Palestinian people to CUNY law's adoption of the BDS resolution. It was the students' union who adopted it, and then the faculty supported it. Each win came with escalating repression. Commencement speeches by organizers like Fatima Mohammed were censored. The BOT, the Board of Trustees, charged her with hate speech. Events like the Palestine Lives conference at John Jay were canceled under pressure by external right-wing and pro-Israel organizations doxed students and faculty, accusing them of anti-Semitism and being terrorist sympathizers. This is the context in which the 2024 Gaza Solidarity Encampment emerged, not as a spontaneous protest, but as the latest in a decades-long battle over CUNY's soul. When students pitched tents at City College to protest the unfolding US-backed genocide of Palestinians in Gaza and the spread of imperialist war on the region, they were consciously invoking the 1969 occupations, just as their repression. And I should point out, we are the only New York City encampment that was hit with felony charges, echoed the Rap Couder purges. And when administrators like Vincent Boudreau, the president of CCNY, a former scholar of social movements, called the NYPD on their own students, they proved that CUNY's leadership still answers to the same ruling class forces that have always sought to crush dissent. What makes this moment different is the clarity it has forced. The encampment did not just expose CUNY's ties to genocide, it exposed the foundations of the university in systems of oppression and exploitation. By drawing connections in terms of the investments, contracts, and institutional ties between the university and settler colonial genocide in Palestine, the encampment organizers brought into sharp relief that the university is one of the foremost institutions reproducing capitalist social relations. So the moment the first tents went up at Columbia's Butler Lawn on April 18th, 2024, a seismic shift occurred in campus organizing. When NYPD officers in riot gear dragged away students demanding divestment from Israeli apartheid and settler colonial genocide, they unwittingly ignited what would become a citywide uprising. For CUNY organizers, already battle-hardened from years of fighting repression on their own campuses, Columbia's crackdown was both a warning and a call to action. Within days, hundreds of CUNY students, faculty, and community members established a permanent presence at Columbia, rotating security shifts, organizing teach-ins, and building what would become the infrastructure for their own encampment. By April 25th, the CUNY Gaza Solidarity Encampment seized the quad at City College, transforming it into a liberated zone. The 5 demands they developed plastered across its central banner, from divestment to fair contracts for CUNY workers and free CUNY to demilitarization, were not just slogans, but a revolutionary curriculum distilled from years of coalition work with Cops Off Campus campaigns, the 2020 uprising for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Palestine solidarity organizing. Every aspect of the deoccupation, from community kitchens to its emergency medical tents, was an act of world building, a living rejection of the neoliberal university. Nursing students triaged injuries, adjunct professors formed human shields against the police, and local Harlem residents smuggled in supplies through gaps in the fence. As one organizer noted, we felt safer in the encampment than in our daily lives, a damning indictment of CUNY's neglect of its working class students. Perhaps the encampment's most radical innovation was its pedagogical praxis. There was daily programming fused Freirean dialogue with the urgency of insurrection. Marxist economists broke down CUNY's investments in Boeing alongside Palestinian poets reciting verses for the martyrs of Gaza. There were beautiful acts of solidarity, like Jewish organizers who held Passover Seders on the quad, or the Muslim students who led dawn prayers under makeshift canopies. This exposed the bankruptcy of the liberal dialogue initiatives on our campus. When the NYPD finally stormed the encampment on April 30th, they found not chaos, but a disciplined collective. Legal observers streamed the assault live. Medics prepared trauma kits. Veteran organizers guided newcomers through arrests. When CCNY President Boudreaux declared a state of emergency, bypassing student governance protocols, he unleashed the NYPD's notorious Strategic Response Group, a counter-terror unit with a documented history of brutality against Black and Brown communities. The brutalization of the encampment seemed methodical. Kettling tactics banned since 2020, body cameras deactivated, medics blocked from treating chemical burns and broken bones. Officers ripped hijabs from Muslim women and zip-tied protesters, a deliberate escalation meant to criminalize solidarity with Palestine. As police dragged students away, their chants, this is a quote, "We are your worst nightmare," echoed the 1969 occupiers who had faced similar repression. The felony charges levied against the CUNY 28, now the CUNY 8, revealed the administration's fear of this multiracial working class movement's potential. In the aftermath, organizers turned repression into leverage. The People's Hearing at CUNY Law, held outdoor after BOT trustees fled to Zoom, became a tribunal where students testified about police violence and CUNY's complicity in genocide. Meanwhile, the CUNY administration signed a $4 million contract with Strategic Security Corps, a private militia with ties to Homeland Security and Israeli surveillance firms. This move exposed the university's real priorities. While pleading poverty to justify austerity cuts, it bankrolled counterinsurgency against its students. The release of the Lippman report in September 2024 marked an escalation in the weaponization of institutional power to suppress academic freedom and Palestine solidarity at CUNY. Commissioned by Governor Kathy Hochul, led by former Chief Judge Jonathan Lippman, the report cynically exploited legitimate concerns about anti-Semitism to criminalize anti-Zionist speech. While it acknowledged the absence of widespread anti-Semitic incidents at CUNY, its core recommendations, adopting the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, centralizing hate speech reporting, and imposing protest restrictions, were designed to conflate criticism of Israel with bigotry. This created a chilling effect. Faculty reported censoring syllabi on settler colonialism, while Palestinian and Muslim students faced increased surveillance under the guise of campus safety. The report's true aim was revealed when its findings were weaponized by far-right city council members like Inna Vernikov, who had previously brandished a gun at a pro-Palestine rally at Brooklyn College to justify hearings further stigmatizing student activists. I know I'm running out of time. I got your notice, Chantali, so I'll just conclude by saying that the encampment proved CUNY's unique organizing potential. Unlike elite universities, its 250,000 students are woven into New York City's neighborhoods, making its activism impossible to quarantine. When Queens College invited the NYPD to harass Muslim students while hosting an FBI propaganda shoot, organizers disrupted both. Most recently, when students who attempted to set up a liberated zone at CCNY, building on the encampment's 5 demands, were met with violent repression, including tear gassing by the so-called peace police, CUNY peace police. They were met outside, the students, by over 100 protesters from the broader CUNY community who joined them as they pivoted to a protest around the CCNY campus. The campus movement is also quick to respond to new developments. The recent wave of executive orders issued by Donald Trump targeting Palestine solidarity, migrants, trans, and gender nonconforming people were immediately taken up by the movement and seen to represent a dangerous escalation in the criminalization of political dissent and campus activism. Facing escalating state repression, CUNY organizers sprang into action, transforming their work from the encampment into a broader struggle for sanctuary and popular university organizing. Through town halls and a CUNY-wide statement, they demanded radical institutional transformation to protect vulnerable communities and dismantle systems of oppression. Their efforts build on a long legacy of resistance, from the Underground Railroad to the 1980s sanctuary movement. Their demands call for ending collaboration with ICE, DHS, NYPD, protecting student data, halting weaponized Title VI investigations, providing legal and mental health support for targeted communities, abolishing campus policing, adopting BDS to cut ties with genocide profiteers. But it's not just about symbolic sanctuary, it's about fundamentally remaking CUNY into a popular university. That means abolishing tuition and guaranteeing free healthcare and housing, replacing the Board of Trustees with democratic student worker governance, centering Indigenous and Black liberation in our curricula. These demands merge immediate defense for those under attack with a long-term vision, forcing CUNY to finally live up to its promise as the people's university. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kuna. I think it's really important to see that one of the, having been there at the encampment, is the way in which all of the issues regarding tuition, Gaza solidarity, sanctuary, immigration, were all woven together. And, similar to what you said, being there, students commented that, many of my students at the law school were there both as participants, but also as legal observers, that this is the first time they felt like they were actually in a real university, and that was at the encampment at in City College. So we're going to come back to sort of this alternative future. To what extent can we imagine a different type of university that honors all our students? So with that, I want to invite Musa Karim to share with us the student experience and the current climate at CUNY. So Musa.
Hello. I wanted to say thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on this panel and speak with all of you. I wanted to start out by saying CUNY and our universities don't represent the students. They don't represent the faculty. They don't represent who we are. Our our colleges are investing in these weapon manufacturers companies. They have zero zero care for their students, zero commitment to their promises for free tuition for university for all. Our repression has only increased, but our resistance only increases more and more by the day. We have, as a students, we've made multiple accomplishments. We've we've um we've shut down Kathy Hochul's events. We've completely brought the student movement together. We've completely brought our struggles together and fought for them, because we know when Palestine is free, we're all going to be free. Um, coming, speaking of the CUNY encampment, the CUNY Gaza Solidarity Encampment, we this was the only place where students were Palestinian students, for the majority, and students of color and students from all marginalized groups at CUNY felt safe for the first time, like Professor Mullen said, at CUNY, their colleges, um, in a long time, because we know our colleges, they don't have our interest in mind. They only they only they only function off of their capitalist values, and that's the only way that that they function and run is is through investing in genocide and not having zero care for its students. You know, professors will with zero repercussions go up to students and call them, imply that they're terrorists, saying that they're gonna come into class with a AK-47, saying sexualizing women in class, and just sexualizing students, and they face no consequences when and zero backlash. Um, Students can record in class even at CUNY, and the student and professors will have the nerve to flick off the camera and say, show this to the dean of students. So, you know, CUNY has been a horrible experience for me as a Palestinian, um, to say the least. And knowing that my tuition dollars, and I've been given zero choice for to have a higher education, I am forced to put my money into into a tuition that is going and investing into Israeli and profiting off of settler colonialism, Israeli settler colonialism, to be exact. Um, until the encampments, the student movement was growing, but it very much came together, and we were all collectivified, and we all moved as one. We all moved as one, and it showed how much we like, when the students are united, we can't be defeated. As much as they try, we will never back down. As much as they try, we'll never back down, regardless of who's in presidency, who's in office. We're going to continue to adapt and continue to resist in every ways that we can, because that's what matters. We know that that's what matters, regardless of what we face, whatever consequences we face. They can deport us, they can dox us, they can do whatever they want, but we're not going to stop giving up on. We're not going to stop fighting for our people. We're not going to stop fighting until the genocide in Gaza stops, until all of Palestine is free from the river to the sea. Um, Again, with the encampments, NYPD was the most violent. They made up to 1,000, up to, I believe, over 1,000 arrests at CCNY in all of New York, and when they took down all the encampments, and people had their teeth knocked out. People were had concussions. People were knocked to the ground, slammed on their heads over and over at all these protests. It's the same repression from the police. But you know, we still continue. We don't stop. As the students, we're committed. Everybody from all walks of life. We have our anti-Zionist Jewish allies. We have our Puerto Rican allies. We have our Black allies. We have our Chinese allies. We have so many different allies from all different parts of the world, and it's completely diverse. The support for Palestinian liberation. We're at a point where it's the awareness and the awareness for Palestine, the care and the support for Palestine is at an all-time high, and this is a complete victory. Although our people have taken the complete have taken have faced genocide for over 75 years and continue to, the people have been completely mobilized more than ever before, and the students, in fact, and that we demand a better opportunities for a future, better opportunities where we can put our money and gain degrees and licenses without putting our money into weapons manufactured companies that's killing human beings, Palestinians, children, men and women. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Musa. I think in terms of drawing the connections and talking about the encampment, just to also like highlight just the tremendous solidarity across multiple issues. And I think Ellen talked about this, the attack on the university. These are, in the CUNY experience, it's working class students. This is making connections between NYPD sort of increased racial profiling and violence that students of color, working class students at CUNY have already experienced, right? At the same time, the issue of lack of tuition, of affordability. So I think that although some of these issues sort of emerge in the context of the Gaza organizing, that what was important to keep in mind is, you know, and somewhat biased as someone who was there up until the police sort of raiding the city college, is our students get it. They got the connections between racial profiling, what we're seeing today around immigration and deportation, and the need for affordable higher education, the gendered. So all of these issues were coming together. It's not surprising that the attack on CRT is happening, the time that there's all the executive orders are kind of a reflection of what you've seen and what the students have seen. So we want to encourage you to put into the chat comments or questions that you may have for our guests. While we do that, I wanted to just give maybe each of our panelists just 1 minute if there were sort of reactions to each other that you want to sort of amplify. Maybe particularly Ellen, as you're hearing kind of this panel is about forgotten past and our future, right? And so things that maybe that's struck you in the current moment from your historical work. Maybe I think it might be helpful to close to have that group. But while we're hearing from Ellen, please post into the chat your comment and questions for our panelists.
Well, of course, one thing I didn't talk about was all the student activism at City College in the 1930s. It was a hotbed of anti-fascism, very much like what we're seeing today with the, pro-Palestinian movement. They disrupted, I think they used to go in disrupting, presidential commencements and things like that during that period. Many of them were communists. They sort of had a movement they felt that put everything together. They were also concerned about racial issues at a very early point. in the 1930s when there was somebody teaching Black history, I think, at City College, so that it was very much a place of real, not, I don't want to say opposition so much, as real openness, is really allowing for multiple voices, I think, in the 1930s. I mean, you have to realize that it was, of course, almost entirely white. Uh, but so, and then it was also incredibly important during the 1960s, pushing curricular issues, which sort of really transformed American intellectual life in ways that, we probably don't realize how much has changed. But, I know that when I was in college in the 50s, nobody, you could read Marx, but not really. And there was no attempt to have students do anything with regard to politics. They simply didn't, there was no politics. There was, my late husband was graduated from City College, I think in 1957, and was the head of the NAACP, he and his wife, I think. And the university tried to crack down on whatever student activism there was, and decided they were going to make every student political group, of which there were very few, put submit lists of their members. We're talking about the origins of surveillance, which I assume is massive now.
Right, we're seeing the requests from CUNY to give our students, so we see current iterations of that as well.
Yeah, that's what I would imagine. And so what they did was they decided that every student group the same group of people would sign up to every single group. They were trying to be creative. So, it really is, as you pointed out, Chamtoli, recycling so much of the past. And yet, the amount of pushback that we're seeing today is really amazing.
Okay.
Because what's happening now is worse.
Mhm.
They're rounding up people and sending them to black holes in El Salvador.
And that, just to bring in Karina into this, there are a few questions.
Yeah.
So while there's similarities, I think you've talked about this sort of arc, this kind of history, but one of the questions was, given the move to higher security and other factors related to curricular chilling, self-censorship, do you think CUNY is currently at a place where it has institutional autonomy? How do we move towards institutional? Because, part of the motivation of today's talk is thinking about governance, and part of the Critical Legal Collective is, at the law school, we're also subject to CUNY Central. So our faculty are then, similarly out there representing some of the individuals who are under attack. And so that puts us as lawyers also in the attack, and our students are also similarly impacted. So what do you see as like institutional autonomy, or where it's now at? And I'm going to scroll through the questions. Please put your comments, and if I miss it, just kind of, hopefully Kate and I will be able to catch your questions and comment. Karina.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the short answer is no. No, there's no institutional autonomy because, CUNY is really, it's beholden both to the state So, you know, when we look at the Littman investigation, for example, that was initiated by Hochul. And that is really what has enabled this sort of latest round of surveillance and repression. You know, we've seen an increase. I think there are now 50 Title VI investigations, something around that number, across CUNY right now, many of them into, like, you know, creating hostile learning environment in the class for teaching about the history of Palestine or talking about the genocide. In addition to what, you know, Musa and you've mentioned, Shamtali, too, about, you know, surveillance and repression of the students, increased number of disciplinary measures taken against students. You know, and so we have the state, right, that is pushing this, and, you know, was also most likely behind the repression of the encampment as well. You know, we know certainly Mayor Eric Adams, as well as Hochul, certainly wanted to see those encampments shut down. And then, so you've got that, you know, and the fact that a council member shows up at camp, you know, CUNY campus with a gun, and nothing happens. Not a statement from the president of the university, not a statement from the president of Brooklyn College campus, let alone from the chancellor. Yet the chancellor and the board of trustees had no problem throwing one of their students, who, you know, gave what the valedictorian, I think, the commencement speech at CUNY Law the year she graduated, you know, Fatima Mohammed, you know, threw her under the bus when she was under attack by right-wing, extreme right-wing forces. Added to that by calling her incredibly brilliant. Look it up, you'll find it online. Her powerful, brilliant, I know you know Shamtali's speech for CUNY Law that year, and, you know, connecting the dots between the you know, settler colonial violence. This is before the recent genocide, but, you know, ongoing genocide in Gaza with police brutality, racist police brutality, capitalism and imperialism. It's a brilliant speech, and they label it hate speech, you know. So so anyway, you know, the point is that, you know, you have that on the one hand, then you have the board of trustees. So you've got the state repression, which is, you know, increasingly fascist, and then on the other hand, they're beholden to capital. You know, and that's what the Board of Trustees is about, is ensuring that the university, you know, continues to function as a space for, you know, reproducing capitalist social relations, and through its investments, you know, maintaining capital accumulation on the backs of the repression and exploitation of people in the global South. And in particular, in the current context, you know, the genocide in Gaza through the, you know, over $8 million in investments in weapons industries. So, yeah, I don't think we can say we have institutional autonomy. It's not, you know, and I remember thinking that clearly at the time of the raid on the encampment, who runs this institution? You know, how does a president call in the SRG, you know, notoriously brutal, knowing that these students are largely working class, Black and brown, right? How do you call that? These are your students. This is what makes this university. You know, so like Musa said, you know, who do they represent? You know, they don't represent the students. They don't represent, certainly not the precarious faculty, who are a majority of faculty at CUNY. You know, I myself am an adjunct. The majority of faculty at CUNY are adjuncts. And you talked about, Ellen, this is part of a broader neoliberalization of our universities. You know, so certainly they don't represent their interests or the students' interests. You know, I don't even think full-time faculty's interests. So yeah, I don't think we have, what are we going to do to get it? I mean, the idea is being discussed. I support 100% the to abolish the Board of Trustees and replace it with a student worker alliance for governance. I mean, I think that's the only way we're going to have democratic representative governance in this institution, or any institution of higher education, and any semblance of institutional autonomy requires that, I would say.
Great, and I want to come back to this idea, Musa, that you raised about that, you know, CUNY isn't representing the student. And I think we see that across the universities, where the board of trustees or the individuals that lead decision-making tend to be removed. Either they're corporate board members or they have no connection to the school. So before I turn it to you to maybe elaborate a little bit of like from the student perspective of what you see, I wanted to lift up Angela Harris's question, which I think will help us to move towards the future part of this discussion and maybe slowly close from there. Is as we think about designing a more free and inclusive university, how do we address this dilemma that for state-run institutions, it's the board that has or the government, the HOCO, that has the capacity to create the free tuition. So the agents that are creating the kind of the repression are the decision makers that would create that, but they are also subject to capture, political capture. So this is the tension that we're in. I would add that it's true also for private universities. I mean, as someone who's an alumni of Columbia, the alum chatter is very like alive in terms of, well, even if private institutions are not able to like push back, I mean, yes, maybe Harvard did, but like even so, I think there's some article about they shouldn't be given as much praise as they're getting because they've been also equally complicit in a lot of repression on the campus. So, so I just put that question out there for all the panelists. We'll end with that, but Musa, maybe you want to, if that question spoke to you of like, what would the CUNY that, you know, that is for you look like, and how might we through our activism get there?
Through so you know, at the encampment we had the 5 demands. I think those 5 demands are central to what a CUNY that we all want to see looks like, um where it's not run by fascists, it's not run by the board of trustees, and we would have autonomy over ourselves as students, and how and who teaches us, and and how we run our school, and what our school invests in, and at the very least that it's not profiting and invested in genocide and settler colonialism. Um, the board of trustees, they represent the state, they represent their pockets, whatever makes their money, that's what they care about. Our um we've gone to the board of trustees meetings over and over and over again. We've countless times we step one after another giving our testimonies, just for them to stare with a blank face of complicity and monstrosity, to be quite frank. um we're pouring our souls to them in there, and you know, we see no change. But this isn't the only tactic we use. This is just a an example of how we have gone to a lot of extent to prove and to show how much we actually want a free CUNY, and a CUNY that isn't complicit in genocide and settler colonialism. Um, the state represents their capitalist interests, and yeah, the 5 demands are definitely central to what the students want to see for the overwhelming majority, especially in the student movement. Um, some campuses have achieved divestment, and it's important that we don't stop, and we continue to not only do the same tactics, but continue to improve, and to as soon as when they get better and they get more smarter, we have to get smarter as well. We have to continue to improve and escalate, um, and change tactics to um, to achieve change, because we can only do the same thing for so long, and we will do that same thing as long as we can. Um, what for fighting for our people. Um, but yeah, the board of trustees, they represent their pockets, and that's not going to change, unfortunately, unless we escalate and we continue to organize, and everybody becomes organizers, and we continue to bring people into our movement and continue to have these conversations and continue to create these spaces where we can have these conversations and discuss and all give our ideas and create a front. Yes.
One
Go ahead. I think in terms of, I think it's just the demands and kind of creating a broad base. There was a comment about, just, building out from those who are already kind of preaching the choir. So building out our base and the organizing. I wanted to bring in a couple of comments from Juliana and Liliana in terms of some other options, so one is to create so again, this is responses to Angela's comments about how do we create a new structure given these constraints, a legal structure that receives funding from the state, but is independently owned and managed by workers and students, more public pressure to make academic freedom constitutional right. The only thing I want to mention about the legal structure, when CUNY Law School was founded in 1980s, it was actually founded with the idea of an alternative structure. And so one of the things, in the interest of time, I don't have to go over that we see CUNY Central and the Board of Trustees exerting enormous amount of control. So even though we have faculty governance, and we have the ability to determine, the functioning of our law school, still, because of the bylaws and because of the kind of imposition of CUNY Central, and because our funding is from the state, unless we're able to raise private funding, there is always a tension within the law school. So I think the CUNY Law example is a governance example, is an example of trying to create this alternative. We have students and staff all in our governance structure, but then there's a pushback. No, you can't have that. That goes against our bylaws. So just as we're imagining, we should think about sort of what are the, think of a professor by day, but organizer by heart. And I think about SWOT, right? What's our strengths? What are our weaknesses and opportunities? And I think, thinking about all of these strategies are important. Other panelists, Ellen or Karina, want to speak to, and then we'll slowly close out for today's, because it's a series of sessions, hopefully not the only last discussion, but I think, how do we design this alternate future we want? We've been talking about the past and the present in our title, but there is also this alternative future. So how do we imagine or get there? If anyone would like to respond to that in maybe a minute each.
Okay, well, the one thing that is clear is coalition building, is organizing, is working with the community. That people were talking about getting help from outside in the community. And that, I think, is certainly part of the future, is just reaching out, first in your own community, in your own departments, in your own classes, in your own alumni groups. I'm getting active in an alumni group. I never did anything as an alumni. But it's a school that has a certain amount of name recognition. So there are a lot of lefties who went to Harvard beside me. Anyhow, there is a need above all for solidarity, for organizing between whoever is working here, whoever is studying here, whoever feels a connection to what could be such an exciting place, and starts reaching out to others. I mean, I think the key is solidarity.
Do you want to add?
Yeah, I would just say I really agree with everything Ellen said. I mean, I think coalition building in particular is really, really crucial right now. And also going back to the encampments, it's something that organically emerged there. The students did an amazing job of connecting to all the organizations in Harlem. They made connections about gentrification, over policing of Black and brown neighborhoods. And and I think that was what gave it its strength. And so there were so many community members who showed up. And so when the repression happened, it also helped to support people. So I would say definitely build on that. And of course, if you go back to 69, and the achievements made by the student movement then, it was, the Black Panther Party and Young Lords were really instrumental in those struggles. And it's the same today. There are a lot of these, a lot of the coalitions are bringing in groups who are fighting for Puerto Rican liberation, Black liberation, anti-imperialist, one of Nodatal, which is a group fighting against militarization and attacks on North Korea. They're a group that has showed up a lot at CUNY events, and they're one of the partners for the Sanctuary and Popular University organizing. Lots of different intersectional organizations have been involved in that. And the last thing I would just say is labor. Labor is really crucial. Because, of course, as a state institution, there are always threats to cut funding, and that leads to, anticipatory obedience. And we have to fight back against that. And we have a lot of labor power. Our union is 30,000 strong. I think it needs to be used more. There was a lot of support by especially rank and file at the encampment. That we even did an assembly of workers at the encampment. That was one of the most powerful elements, where workers came out in support of the students. And I think we need to see more of that, especially in this moment, being ready to shut down the university if there's ICE on campus, getting ready, prepare, take on the strike. We need to take on the Taylor Law and, be ready to strike, to shut things down, to not just to defend the limited, goods that we have at the university, I think it's still, in terms of, the employment, in terms of the services that are provided to the students, but as we were saying before, to transform the university into something else, to something that where it's fully funded, where we have secure contracts, and for our faculty and staff, where our students have free tuition, and not just that, but access to the life-affirming services that they deserve. We have a majority of students who are food insecure at CUNY, and that's outrageous. Everyone should have access to food and housing and transportation. So the union needs to be ready to put its labor power into action. That's what I think as well.
Well, I mean, as the labor and employment professor at CUNY Law, I definitely co-sign that. And so just in terms of robust coalition, broad-based solidarity, seeing ourselves aligned as faculty and students and staff and workers, I think in terms of pushing for the fully funded, CUNY, I think I think, and as Musa mentioned, the students have put forth very concrete goals of what needs to happen. And I feel like simply as saying, like, let's get those things done as part of our sort of next step. I don't know if Musa, do you want to add one last thing? Otherwise, I'm going to slowly close out our session for today, but I do want to give you an opportunity if there were any closing words.
I wanted to re-emphasize the points of solidarity and faculty solidarity specifically. I think those are really, really important. Like historically speaking, those have been faculty support has been something that's gained gained results in the past, and I think that's very, very important that the faculty remain steadfast and their commitment to the movement and to the liberation of Palestine and to the end of CUNY and the broad state's investment in genocide and Israeli colonialism. I think that's extremely important. I think that's all.
Yeah, no, great. No, I just wanted to, the last thing before I turn it over to Isaac to talk about sort of future seminars, I couldn't help notice in the chat a number of great suggestions, you know, to perhaps like change our constitution, what I call sort of very like legal oriented strategies. And I guess maybe the sort of law person here, I'm going to sort of say something that's like counter to my profession, is that what we get shouldn't be based on what the legal rights are at the present are, that what we should demand should be much broader than that. We already know that the Constitution and legal regimes, the deportation regime has been in existence since 1996. A lot of what's being happened, although it's shocking to some, it's been known to many communities of color that the legal regime has been complicit in facilitating a lot of this attack on academic freedom, of workers' rights. And so I guess I would just, as we're imagining sort of new governance, and definitely I sort of boast CUNY law as like one sort of robust faculty staff governance as an example, I would just caution us to sort of oftentimes our over-reliance perhaps on legal strategies is necessarily resolving the political crisis in this moment. And so for us to think maybe think about how we might kind of push for the demands of solidarity and organizing, and maybe concretize that within systems, so in a reverse. So there's much more to say on that, but I just wanted to highlight that at the end of the day, do we want to be so much regulated by the state, or do we, as Karina mentioned, want to have a counter through labor or other coalitional efforts? Time flies when you're having fun and moderating. I'm gonna close out for today. I want to thank our brilliant panelists, Alan, Musa, Karina, for speaking behind the scenes. I also want to give a shout out to Kate, who is sort of done a run a show, who's like pulled together all of these like details. Others from our CLC, from our Critical Legal Collective members here, from our co-sponsors. And so I just wanted to thank each of you for coming out as well, for your comments. And so with that, I'm sure I forgot something. You can blame me, but I'm gonna turn it over to Isaac to let you know what's coming next, and to stay tuned and to really be plugged into this grouping that's forming to really address some of these critical issues that we all care about. So Isaac, and then I think you'll close us out.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the panelists. Another shout out to Kate, who has done incredible legwork to keep this, to make all things happen. To Shannon, Shamtoli, Alan, Karina, and Musa. And I think that it's just important to kind of, we're starting this conversation based on the fact that we're so many of us are demanding a different kind of university, realizing that we are not fighting in this moment to go back to the status quo of the Biden regime or Trump 1 or even the Obama era. That's not the goal. The goal is to create something new. However, whenever we try to think about what that might look like, these questions of governance and political economy are really tricky. In the chat, Timothy Kaufman Osborne wrote, "For what it's worth, I tried to critique the current legal form of the university and offer an alternative," and then a link to the fantastic book, The Autocratic University, or The Autocratic Academy, which is many of us who kind of thought of this panel and this series are deeply informed by that book and that question of how can we think of organizing universities in ways that are more democratic? Kind of how do we institutionalize that? How do we fund those? What kind of alternative futures can we build? So as Shamtoli mentioned, this is the first of what we are planning as a series of conversations around that. The next panel, we're hoping to look at Indigenous thinking around education and higher education in particular. There's been a lot that's come out in this conversation about decolonial project and the project of a free Palestine being tied to a project of decolonization and a refusal of the settler state. We want to take that prompt as seriously and think about what happens if we come at this question of what does it mean to build a different university through that question of Indigenous sovereignty, Indigenous learning and knowledge, and how we can learn from that those traditions as well. So we will keep you informed about that panel and other panels that are coming in the future, but we really just want to incubate an ongoing conversation, and we all look forward to thinking, working, and organizing with you all in the months and years to come. So everybody have a lovely evening, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.